So I'm gonna tell you guys a story. It's like I don't even know how many years ago it was, but I was a kid, and one day I was just hanging out and just walking through the neighborhood, and I saw this black Mustang. And when I saw the Mustang, I looked in the window and I thought that the guy driving the car was my dad. And as some of you may or may not know, I didn't really grow up with my dad that much. So being a boy, loving our dads as we do, I got really excited. And so as I saw the car going down the road, I started chasing it. And I was going after it, man, like Forrest Gump or something. And I was screaming, Dad, Dad, Dad. Because in my mind, I had this image that my dad was going to see me and he was going to stop the car. And I was going to get in the car and I was going to drive down the road. And these kids in the neighborhood who had never really seen my dad before, so it was almost like I didn't really have one, were going to see me riding in this nice Mustang beside my dad. And I was going to look out the window and be like, yeah. And they were going to see my dad, who's a kind of suave, cool kind of dude, kind of the opposite of me. And they were going to see me rolling with him, and they were going to say, wow, man, Pedro's got this cool dad, and his dad's driving his Mustang, wearing his gold chains and everything. And so I was feeling pretty excited about this story I was making up in my head. And so I continued to chase the car, and as it got to Campbell Street, the street that I lived on, and it made that left turn, I just knew it was my dad. And I'm booking as hard as I can, but it's a Mustang, and I'm on my feet. So eventually I get there. And then when I get to the corner, I can see that the car is in my driveway. And I'm extra excited, and I get this bolt of adrenaline. And I start running faster. And I get to the car, to the driveway. I'm totally out of breath, and I go, Dad. And this dude's knocking on the door. And I turn around, or he turns around, not my dad. And I'm in shock. And then he says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not your dad. And then obviously. And then find out he's the Kirby vacuum cleaner salesman. And they were checking in on us because my family had bought, when my parents were still together, they had bought a Kirby vacuum cleaner. And I talked to him for a couple seconds, found out he was from the same country as my dad, same island. His family was from the same island. I said, what? What are the chances of this? And he walked away, and I'm not going to lie, when I was a little kid, I used to really wish that somebody would be like my dad. I had Chico, as I mentioned in the previous blog. But at any rate, so I was going through that little thing that little guys go through. And then he took off, and I knew I was never going to see the guy again. And I sat there with the disappointment that I felt, and I said, man, and my initial instinct was to take it out on my dad, because that's what a lot of us do. And then I started thinking for a little bit, and I said, okay, hold on, I can't get mad at my dad for this situation, at least not this particular situation, because he wasn't there. He didn't know I was making up this story that this guy was him and blah, blah, blah. And so I asked myself, what could I do differently with the information that I had at the moment? And as I traced back, I realized that it was my expectations that had caused my suffering, not really my dad, not that guy, not society, but just my expectations. And when I was able to look back and I thought about it, I said, now what if I saw that car and I didn't think anything? What if I just saw the car drive by and I went to the house, and saw the guy there and had no expectations that it was my dad? How would I have experienced it differently? And I realized that what I would have experienced was the thing as it was. I realized that my expectations had colored what was and created something that was not. And then when reality met up with the story that I made up, I was suffering and disappointed because of my attachment to the story. And once I connected those dots, I started looking at everything in my life, all the feelings I felt in the past, all the hopes I had for the future, and I realized that they were all colored by expectation. Now, I'm not going to say that expectation is wrong or anything like that, but I think that there are healthy ways to use it and unhealthy ways to use it. I'm not going to get into that right now. What I am going to do is talk about scarification, or what this blog is about. Because I found that, at least in my own life, that my expectations created a greater potential for scarification. I didn't know the word at the time, obviously, but that feeling, and I think you all know what I'm talking about by now, that feeling of just being wounded in a way that you never want to be wounded again. And at the same time, it protects you from pain. It also prevents us from experiencing life as it is. So there's got to be some kind of balance, or we're going to be living our lives as some very scarred and very protected, but also human beings who don't have certain experiences. At any rate, going back to myself, my story, I ended up approaching life that way. And what I found was that I was actually pretty joyful because a lot of things didn't stick to me. Unfortunately, it was something that I couldn't share with other people because every time I got into any kind of intimate relationship, I found that it always had the same similar pattern. When I first met the person, they would experience me as kind of awesome, somewhat intense, because I was fully present in our situation at the moment. I was fully engaged. I listened to them. I wasn't judging them because I didn't have any expectations of them. But then when the relationship got a little deeper and the person not only had expectations of me, because usually they came with some messed up expectations of me for just whatever reasons, different stories, black man, whatever. But then they would meet me and say, well, he defies my expectations, or at least he doesn't match my expectations. So they would make up a new story about me, about how awesome I was. But then later, when the situations got a little bit more intimate, they had these different expectations of me. And because I didn't have expectations of them, I sure as heck didn't care about their expectations of me. And so I didn't really live into them, and that was frustrating. And on the other note, sometimes they would try to see if I cared by trying to make me jealous or do other things. And I'm not just talking about girls. I'm just talking about just people in general. Once they got close to me and they tried to figure me out, they would do little things to try to push my buttons to see where my limits were. But they didn't know or understand that I really had no expectations. And so when they would do that, I would just see them doing it, but I didn't really give it that much of a meaning. And then when they would say, well, I'm not going to hang around you anymore, I would say, okay, well, it was cool hanging out with you when we did. And you can see how this could get frustrating. And I can see how this gets frustrating frustrating as I look back on my life. But it didn't hurt me none at the time, so I kept rolling with it until one day I got in a situation where I was tempted to have an expectation, and I chose to have an expectation. And when I did, kind of my whole little way of doing things unraveled. And I didn't realize it was unraveling at the time, so it took quite a while before I really felt the full effects of the unraveling. And then I felt the temptation to let this situation scar me. And I started asking myself, like, why would I let it hurt me so much? Because I could have let it go like I let go of so many other things that could have been potentially disappointing and scarring. But I realized that the reason why I didn't want to let it go and the reason why I wanted to be scarred consciously was I never wanted to go through that type of experience again. And so anytime I started to go in a direction that would lean toward that experience, I would remember that scar, and then I would know to back off, or at least to get the other person to back off. It's kind of like a self-preservation kind of thing. And so over some years, I've been trying to kind of work with that because I pretty much don't have that many scars. I have not allowed myself the luxury of having that many scars. But I do have this one scar. And it's kind of like the thorn in the flesh that Paul talks about. And the funny thing is, as that story of Paul teaches, he said that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. Because Paul had prayed for the scar or the wound or whatever it was that was bugging him to be gone. And there's something to that. So, what do I say? Well, I'm not going to sit here and tell you be scarred and identify yourself as a scarred person so that you have to make excuses for living your life in a certain context. What I'm going to say instead is choose your scars wisely. How does that sound? Choose your scars wisely. Because, there are some things that I think need to be put to an end, and there needs some people to be able to know when to say enough is enough. And so I guess for that, there has to be some kind of reminder, like when we look at things like the Holocaust or slavery, there's got to be some stuff that says, no, that's not happening here anymore. And scars kind of give us that. But at the same time, we can't be limited by those scars where we say, well, because this happened a long time ago, I'll never get to this, that, or the other thing. So there's got to be some healthy balance of being able to remember while not being limited by what we remember. I have not perfected a way of doing that. I'm just working on it. And I just wanted to share it with you. So I guess if there's any message here today, it's going to be choose your scars wisely. Realize that it's our expectations that often prepare us for our woundings. And as far as criticism is concerned, I think you can easily tie that back to expectations because generally speaking, I think the criticisms that hurt the most are the ones that come from the people that we wouldn't expect the criticism from. So that's my little way of making that connection. So hopefully, as I often say, you got something out of this. And if you do, you know what? Share it. I've been doing this blog this blog only this year, but I've been doing other blogs for several years now. And I don't know how much I've encouraged people to share it, but I'm encouraging you to share it now because, well, look, maybe it might motivate somebody else to put their experiences out there. Or maybe somebody out there today is having a hard time. Maybe they're feeling scarred and they don't know that they can choose their scars. They can choose how to deal with these things. And so that's what I'm putting out there. I'm asking you to share it. And hopefully we'll come across each other someday. Have a good conversation. Maybe some coffee or tea. Thanks for your time. Take care. Bye.